compari che vuoi suonare, che si suona un friscaletto, è come si suona. Is for us to have a conversation. I have provided some questions for Dr. Carle that she has reviewed, and she will go through them and then open it to the audience. So be saving up your questions. We'll take them at the end. Barbara Carle is a professor of Italian at California State University, Sacramento. She has taught there since 2003. She has academic degrees, including her doctorate from Columbia University in New York City. Dr. Carle is a poet, literary critic, and translator, as well as a scholar of Italian literature, including Dante. She has lectured widely in the United States and Europe, including Italy. She has agreed to discuss a wide range of topics today with us, including the 700th anniversary of Dante's death, her life as a poet, her perceptions of Italian culture today, and she also will read at least a little of her poetry, probably both in Italian and English for those of us who are not able to handle the Italian as we would like. And so let me get started. Let me again, Carle, thank Dr. Carle for making this time available so that we can share her knowledge of Italy, a place that we all would like to be more than we are, and she does go back regularly. You were raised, Dr. Carle, by a diplomatic family and exposed to many languages. Why did you select Italian to pursue and make your career? I think you were born in Bangladesh, if I'm not mistaken.
I was born in thank you, first of all, for having me. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and know a little more about the Pacific-Italian Alliance. Yes, I was born in a diplomatic family in Peshawar, Pakistan.
Where Pakistan, sorry. Next door, yeah. Actually, it was probably all Pakistan at that time, but yeah.
It was. At that time, it wasn't separated yet, yes.
Right.
Yes, that's true. So I was definitely traveling in a lot of countries, Pakistan, then later Bangladesh when there was the war, and obviously India, North Africa, Thailand, Iran, South America as well. And when I was 16, almost 17, my father was sent to Libya, to Tripoli. And there weren't any schools there because of the situation at the time with Gaddafi. And so he sent me, how terrible, to boarding school in Rome. And basically that's what decided everything, really. Just it was a sort of, I clicked, I fell in love at first sound with Italian, with the language, definitely. And that decided really everything I did after that.
Well, that's wonderful. Very interesting. Let me jump into something that I think all of us feel we should be doing, but not all of us do, which is read Dante. Dante is the book for Italians. Why do you think someone these days should read Dante? He came from a very different world, a really pre-Renaissance world, a high Middle Age world, which is very different than ours. Why should we pick up the book?
Well, thank you for that question. We're now celebrating the 700th anniversary of Dante's death in September of 1321. And in Italy, 2 days ago, was Dante Di, which is the new Dante Day that was decided last year. And there were all types of events, conferences, readings, just so many that I would need a class to tell you all about them. I myself was involved in some of them, but it's definitely a very important aspect of Italian culture, Dante. But there are 1,000 reasons I could give you, so I'm going to try and give you just one or two. So I'll begin by saying that what I tell my students is that great books give you what you need. And the Divine Comedy, which is one of Dante's works, in my opinion, does that. So I just want to quote Terzina of Dante, and I'll comment it, which is from Canto 26 of the Inferno. Considerate la vostra semenza, fatti non foste a viver come bruti, ma a seguir virtute e conoscenza. So consider your origins. You were not made to live as brutes, but to seek virtue, goodness, and knowledge. So this is one reason we were not made to live like brutes. Okay, if we all followed the goal of virtue and goodness and knowledge, the world would definitely be a better place. And I often dream that all politicians read Dante. They would behave differently if they did. So I could also call the Divine Comedy a sort of user's manual on how to live, because it has that as well. That said, it has, as all great poetry, it contains everything, and it can be approached from all sorts of different points of view. It can be approached from a Christian point of view, but from a non-Christian point of view as well, historically, politically, from a literary point of view, from a linguistic point of view, which is perhaps one of the most fascinating, from a theological point of view, etc. And this brings us back to my main point, that a great work gives you what you need.
Very persuasive. Uh, Let me ask, if one was to start deciding that this was a good thing and we ought to go ahead and read the Divine Comedy, is there anything we should do before we pick it up? Any historical information or anything we should have? And how do we decide? There are 100,000 translations. Many of them give the Italian and English. How do we decide which translation and whether there's anything we should use as a prep before we plunge in?
Well, there's no doubt that to read Dante, there are historical references and political references and theological references that he makes that are useful to know. That doesn't mean that you have to necessarily be a medieval historian, but it does help if you know the context of medieval Italy and Europe, where in Italy especially there was a struggle between the papacy and the Holy Roman Emperor. And of course, the city-states were involved in that struggle, sometimes supported by the Pope, sometimes supported by the Emperor, but there was this tension. And of course, the city of Florence, being a rather powerful city-state, was very much a protagonist in all of that. So Dante was on the front lines of that situation, being one of the sort of mayors of Florence. He was a priore, he was on the city council. So you have to know that he had personal relations with the Pope, who detained him in Rome, and so he could go and enter Florence, etc., and support his faction, let's say. So Dante makes a lot of references to the history of his time. So it helps to know about this and a bit of Roman history. And obviously, if you know something of Virgil and you know who is Saint Augustine and you know some of these things, that definitely helps. But you can also just decide to plunge in, and there are many excellent editions with notes. The Italian that we read in Dante is the Italian, okay, it's somewhat distant, but it still is the Italian we read today. The beginning is the language we can all understand and recognize. So that's definitely something which is, the Italian we speak comes from that. Recently, all of Italy is in arms because a German paper in Frankfurt attacked Dante and made a series of statements and said Shakespeare was better, etc., etc. This has created a huge, a lot of reactions. It's a very odd thing, but anyway, the Italian literary tradition that is in the West is one of the longest ones. And I have a sinologist here, and of course we know, he'll tell you that the Chinese literary tradition is the longest uninterrupted one in the world, which is true, obviously. But in the West, the Italian is one of the longest uninterrupted literary traditions because it begins around 1300, okay, with Dante, but even before that, you have poets writing, even before. So I mean that's one of the historical background does help to have some of it, but you don't have to be a specialist. Okay, the question of translations is a pretty complex one, because Dante was first translated in Latin, then in Catalan, and then in Spanish in the 15th and 16th centuries. Those were the earliest translations, and much later in English. English, the first English translations were in the early 1800s, and the first American translation, of course, is Longfellow in the mid to late 1800s. So we have hundreds of years of translations of Dante. Um, so that is a huge, it's a huge subject. Um, I tend to prefer to read the original, but my students need to read the English to dive into the original, okay, because it is complex. Um, I can share with you some websites briefly if you want to see, have an idea of what are the most interesting sites. At Columbia, I read him in Italian and then also in Singleton, which is prose, and Sayers, also Hollander. These are some of the well-known translations, and I've read the French translation of Dante as well, but I always return to the original. So, but if you like, just to give you an idea, if I share my screen, I can show you one or two things, on this question. Okay, so what I'd like to show you first is the Columbia website. It's called Digital Dante. You can access it from my webpage if you follow the links. But if you look up Digital Dante, you should get it. And you have many things. You have the commentary by Teodolinda Barolini, who is an Italian-American specialist of Dante, one of the most, actually, I can say prestigious. And you have her commentary, and then you have the text in Italian and two translations, Mandelbaum, which is more recent, and Longfellow. And you also have a gallery of images, a video of some of her classes, and audio recordings. So you can, start right away and have a look there, which I like this. The other website, of course, is the Princeton Dante website. That one is run by John Hollander. That is excellent for the notes, and it has all the Divine Comedy in Italian and in English, and it has the audio as well. Okay, so you can find that. But on the question also of translations, I wanted to share an article that I was looking at recently, thinking about translation, by a professor who is now emeritus from the University of Virginia, titled Dante's Infernal Fart and the Art of Translation. And he follows one line from Canto 21 of the Inferno, because let's remember that the Divine Comedy is also a comedy, a dark comedy in places, but a comedy. So he takes one line and he looks at all the translations of it, including Botticelli's visual rendition, because the famous painter Botticelli did some drawings from this canto. And here you have these devils who are almost like caricatures, and there's a group of them. They're headed by Malacoda, who is evil tail, and then Barbariccia, who is the head of the 10, and they're supposed to guide Dante and Virgil, and they have these fantastical names. And then at the end, of course, you have this obscene signal that the head devil gives to depart, which is the line that he's looking at, all the versions of this single line, okay? And this is the images here of Botticelli's rendition here, okay? I don't know if you guys can see it well. This one got turned over. Can you guys see this? Is it visible
Yes.
for you?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's because here, but this article, for example, is one that you can find. Here are the devils, okay, and Dante and Virgil, and then this is the signal that Dante describes, okay. The trumpet of paradise here is parodied, it's made fun of, okay, and the signal is, he says, egli aveva del cul fatto trombetta, and he made a trumpet of his ass, literally translated. So he goes through all the different translations of this through time. Okay, so Dante's language, of course, is high and low. Okay, so you have everything. It just gives you an idea.
Very good. Well, obviously, we have a lot to choose from, and I might mention you mentioned Dorothy Sayers was the first translation that I got in college, and she's also the mystery writer. So I was introduced to Lord Peter Wimsey at the same time I met Dante, which I thought was fun. Uh, uh, you let me move on from Dante a little bit and talk about one of the other hats you have. You write poetry in both English and Italian. Uh, what do you see as the strengths and weaknesses of writing in one language versus the other? You often do it in both. You write one and then you translate it. And I'm not sure which way you go, uh, but what do you see as the strengths and weaknesses of each one of those languages in terms of expressing your poetic imagination?
Can I actually? Can I interrupt for just a second?
Sure.
Somebody asked a great question that might tie in with this as well. Understanding that you also speak French, and have you done translations in French as well? So
yes, a little bit. Yes, it's my native. It's my maternal language, French. Yes, it's definitely. It's always there. It's it's always a subcurrent. It's the first language, but I studied Italian more, probably. Well, maybe yes, definitely more than French, and I'm an Italianist, so I was trained as an Italianist. But I speak French at home, and I speak French to my husband and my son. So it's definitely always present.
And I noticed that one of the books that you sent me, though there's only one poem, is in French. In fact, the little book is trilingual. There's Italian, French,
Oh,
and
you mean
English.
Gatizie, yes, yes.
So
Yes.
why do you?
I like it here.
I mean, the
Sorry.
way you're doing it.
Somebody's got something on. Okay, there we go. So how do you decide which one of the languages you're going to use to write the poem initially, whatever you do later in translating?
This is a process, it's a trajectory through time. I think that I've ended up writing more in Italian than in English. And that may have to do because French was my first language, but I didn't study it as much. So it seemed that Italian might have sort of filled that one, and I learned it when I was young enough. As I said, it was love at first sound when I was a teenager, and I just dedicated my life really to Italian, to the Italian language. So English and Italian have very different traditions. The English tradition perhaps is younger, the literary tradition, because when Dante was writing the Divina Commedia, he was writing in a language we still speak today. If I say nel mezzo del cammini nostra vita, most Italians can easily understand that. Okay, it's not some language I don't understand. Whereas you look at Chaucer, who came after Dante, and you try and read the Canterbury Tales, you can't read it. You can't understand. Okay,
yeah, so I was going to say, wanted apra the shirt, the sota is not something that you got to read it. It's about April, but that's all you get.
It's middle English, right?
Yeah.
So that means that the tradition in English is younger and perhaps more open to innovation. Whereas the Italian tradition, because you have Dante and then you have Petrarch and you have Boccaccio, you have the great works right away in the very beginning. So that does add a certain weight, and it means that any poet or anyone writing in Italian has Dante in his DNA. Is impossible not to, and you have to contend with that, which is a huge and a weighty heritage. So that definitely is something that perhaps can be more difficult. But on the other hand, the nature of Italian, being the grandchild of Latin, means that it still retains this incredible flexibility. And it's compact and very flexible, so you can move parts of a sentence around and play with that more. Whereas perhaps English was like that in the past, but it's become with time more rigid, and you can't move around parts of a sentence in English as easily. So that's one of the things that I love about Italian is its flexibility and the way you can play with the syntax of words. And that's one of the reasons why I made this project with my colleague Curtis Smith from classical Chinese to English and Italian, because we were giving different versions and we could move the words around, sometimes to correspond to the classical Chinese in Italian. So that's definitely one of the things I love the most.
To have dialogue with. I've really enjoyed it, and
Was.
I hope I can keep your books.
Yes,
I read most of the poems in English, and I was interested in your attempt at a short narrative poem on the breakup of the
Northerner.
the Northerner right off of Mendocino. Fascinating, and you do a very good job of getting kind of a almost ghostly quality in places, but you follow the facts very closely. I checked on the websites, and
I did a lot of research. Yeah, I went
Yeah.
to the site of the shipwreck as well. Did a lot of work on that.
Are the crosses still there?
Yes, well, they were when I went, what, maybe 7-8 years ago. Yeah, they were slipping down the hill, but yeah.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, thank you again.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And thank you to
Thank
everyone
you.
for
Thank you
attending.
all.
Thank you for everybody, and thank you for all of the guests you brought as well, Barbara. I hope they
Take
enjoyed
time
it.
out of your Sunday afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Bye bye.
Perché ne sono fiero, sono un italiano vero.